Thanks very much, David. It's a great pleasure to be here to speak at the Global Power Summit. I think I haven't got the traditional graveyard slot, which tends to be straight after lunch when everyone falls asleep. But I know that I'm bringing up the rear. I'm your double espresso at the end of a very fine all-day meal that you've had. And I was preparing to say, even before today's events, that it was going to be a hard act to follow Boris Johnson. But there's something about David Haig and brand finance that obviously the power to influence world events of this company is extraordinary. Who else would know that Rishi Sunak would solve the Northern Ireland Protocol, start a fight with Boris Johnson just in time for the Brand Finance Global Power Summit? Boris Johnson would come here, give his views, and that brand finance is now on the front page of my digital edition of the Times, and no doubt every other digital edition of every other British newspaper. What a hero you are, David Haig. And who knew that when David Haig asked me to speak about the Commonwealth, that probably Australia is going to announce its Republican referendum in about 2 hours' time, just to make sure that we get back on the front page again. I dread to think what's going to happen to the Commonwealth in the next 20 minutes. Anyway, a little bit about me. I was the Britain's longest-serving culture minister. I was in post for 6 years, between 2010 and 2016. I served for the whole length of David Cameron's government. In fact, I was the Cameron government's longest-serving minister, bar none, because Theresa May only got round to firing me after she'd fired slightly more important people like George Osborne and Michael Gove. I was responsible, as well as for culture, I was responsible for telecommunications, broadband, the creative industries, film, television, video games. In fact, I don't know if anyone in this room has been fired by a prime minister before, but when you get fired, you get a phone call. I got a phone call from Downing Street in my car on my mobile phone saying the prime minister wants to talk to you in 5 minutes. And I drove off waiting for this call and realized that I had lost my mobile phone signal, which I only got back 20 minutes later when the Prime Minister could phone and fire me. So I reflected on the fact that I served 20 minutes longer as a minister because I'd done such a bad job in rolling out mobile phone coverage across the country. But as the culture minister, I had a ringside seat at how Britain exercises her soft power. I presided, for example, over the UK-Qatar Year of Culture, which I'm sure lives long in the memory of everyone in this room. The UK-Mexico Year of Culture. I went abroad frequently and saw the impact that British culture, media and technology has abroad, places like South Korea and Japan. I was the minister in the year, of course, that London hosted the Olympics, which is an expensive and difficult mechanism to exercise soft power, but undeniably effective. And in fact, the Olympics acted as the catalyst for what was, I think, has been one of the most successful marketing campaigns for any country in recent years. It's been mentioned throughout the day by various people, which is, of course, the Great Campaign. It's been heralded as the most successful international campaign since New York marketed itself as the Big Apple in the 1970s. It was, in my opinion, I'm biased, but it was brilliantly thought through, very professionally executed. Every embassy, high commission adopted the branding and the ethos, as any good brand strategy would do. It serves as a focal point to project Britain's image abroad as a modern, successful global economy, and I think it translated into increased trade and influence across the globe. And of course, at the heart of that campaign was our culture, was our media. The James Bond franchise, for example, was ruthlessly exploited, but as was the Queen's birthday and no doubt the King's birthday going forward, a mix of the traditional and modern, the kind of mix that has served our country very well. And I was always struck by the fact that whenever the Prime Minister travelled abroad on an official visit, DCMS, the department I was in, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, always got a call asking for support from a cultural organisation, whether it was the Royal Shakespeare Company or the London Philharmonic Orchestra. So like many countries, Britain has a formidable armoury with which to project its soft power. Not only do we have a dozen national museums which have a global reputation, and I'm lucky enough to serve on the board of one of them, Tate, but we also have incredible national performing arts organisations, and cultural exchanges with these institutions, I think, add a lot of value to Britain's soft power. The British Museum, for example, prides itself on being a museum of the world, a home for all cultures across the globe. It doesn't always work. I remember the director of the British Museum telling me once how proud he was that he had lent the Cyrus cylinder to Iran. He had lent it to Iran. It's a great object of Persian antiquity, and he got it back, and he said that lending the Cyrus cylinder to Iran was a great way to bring key decision makers in Iran together with key decision makers in Britain. Unfortunately, while he lent it to Iran, they did arrest 6 British sailors who had strayed in what they said into Iranian waters. So the Revolutionary Guard obviously didn't get the memo about the power of soft power. And just to pick up on what was being said on the panel and in the excellent speech that preceded mine, cultural exchange has become more problematic in the 21st century. I think more countries are becoming aware of how their cultural heritage has ended up in European museums as a legacy of colonialism. And the concept of lending countries artifacts which were originally stolen from them has become harder to justify, whether it's the Benin bronzes or indeed the Parthenon sculptures. And this gives me an opportunity to break with the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, which is the real story that the press have not picked up on, which is his colonial attachment to what he calls the Elgin marbles and the belief that the British Museum should hold on to artifacts which were stolen by Lord Elgin from the Greeks and should be returned forthwith. Thank you. This legacy of colonialism is an issue when one considers Britain's role in the Commonwealth and how Britain can maximise the opportunities that the Commonwealth still presents. That's why I thought this discussion about Australia was fascinating, because I was reflecting on the fact that, of course, Britain has absolutely nothing really to add of value to the very important debates about Aboriginal rights in Australia and what that means for Britain's place in the Commonwealth. Because we live in a rapidly changing world, and despite the horror of the invasion of Ukraine or the worrying standoff between the US and China, I think there are grounds for optimism as we see countries adopt dynamic strategies for genuine transformation. I've already bigged up David Haig and Brown Finance, but it is a fantastic British company, and for 20 years it's pioneered the process of valuing corporate brands. But since 2020, as you know, it has published this Global Soft Power Index, which we're discussing today. And I was very struck by the rise of the Gulf nations. I was in Dubai and Abu Dhabi last week, so I'm not surprised to see the UAE enter the top 10 for the first time, to see Saudi Arabia enter the top 20 and Qatar enter the top 25. The UAE is now above countries like Sweden, Australia, South Korea, and the Netherlands. And it shows, therefore, that you cannot rest on your laurels as a country, and also that if you invest in your soft power, it really does pay dividends. I was hugely struck, for example, going to visit the Louvre in Abu Dhabi. What an absolutely astonishing international museum of the highest quality, a great example of what that kind of investment in soft power means. Commonwealth countries, obviously the UK is number 2, but others obviously make the top 40. Canada in the top 10, Australia, Singapore in the top 20, New Zealand, India, Malaysia, South Africa in the top 40. But it is a reminder that Commonwealth countries are powerful in the world, but it's also important to understand that what sets apart the top Commonwealth countries, I don't think, is their membership of the Commonwealth, but by and large their respect for the values that tie many more countries together than just simply Commonwealth countries: the rule of law, the independence of their institutions, and their commitment to democracy. So the Commonwealth is made up of 56 nations. Its cooperation is framed by the Singapore Declaration, signed 50 years ago, and that is about democracy, human rights, good governance, rule of law, free trade, and so on. And the Commonwealth does occupy a unique place in the British Constitution, in our history, and in our mindset. It's embodied in our laws, and it is, in fact, part of the formal title of our foreign ministry, the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office. The headquarters of the Commonwealth is in London, and of course our King, King Charles, is the monarch in 14 other member countries. The Commonwealth has had its fair share of challenges and opportunities. Some countries who were never part of the British Empire have decided to join, such as Mozambique, and others have left. There have been deep political divides, but the Commonwealth survives. It's difficult to know what the trade advantages are of being a member of the Commonwealth. For example, Britain's trade with the Commonwealth is about £120 billion overall. That's about 10% of our global trade, but that trade, by and large, is represented by trading with just 5 members of the Commonwealth. By far our biggest trading partners are the United States, of course, and the European Union. But politicians in Britain often fall back onto the Commonwealth as some kind of lazy trope when they're talking about global trade. It was Liz Truss, our recent short-lived Prime Minister, who called for a Commonwealth trade zone as part of her leadership bid. I don't think much thinking went into that call, but it was just a kind of lazy call about somehow reviving Britain's glorious past. Now that she's back on the backbenches, she's now calling for an economic NATO, which by definition is a more European-focused economic zone, something akin perhaps to this organisation called the European Union. Other stakeholders have called for a revival of Britain's engagement with the Commonwealth in order to push back on malign foreign influence. The think tank Civitas has warned that we are ceding influence in the Commonwealth to the Chinese. It's pointed out that Chinese trade with Commonwealth African countries is increasing while ours has declined. It's a useful point to make, but I wonder how relevant it is. An emerging China is bound to increase its trade with many nation states, and any country like China is bound to increase its trade with countries which it thinks will be useful to project its hard power and its soft power. The US does the same, and so do we. So my thesis is that I think, paradoxically, the Commonwealth acts as a brake on Britain taking its place in the world as a modern global trading nation. I think we sometimes miss the opportunities that our competitors take up with gusto. There are huge benefits, for example, to be gained by Britain engaging in Southeast Asia and the Middle East. I'm biased as the chairman of the UK ASEAN Business Council, but our trade with ASEAN is just a quarter of our trade with the Commonwealth, and yet ASEAN is now in effect the 5th richest nation on earth. I'm not arguing that we should turn our backs on the Commonwealth or in fact disband the organisation. No one would seriously ask Britain to walk away from something of value, even if that value is difficult to quantify. But I do think we need to modernise our relationship with it and put our role into perspective. Not every country in the Commonwealth shares our values, and not all countries are effective trading partners. We should perhaps pivot harder towards organisations and alliances that promote open economies and liberal systems of government. As King Charles prepares for his coronation, there is, in my view, no one better to think deeply about the role of the Commonwealth and the role that Britain plays in the Commonwealth and the role that the Commonwealth plays in Britain's soft power. He has far too great a sense of duty to ever voluntarily give up his thrones. But the transformation of Barbados from monarchy to republic was handled deftly and probably enhanced Britain's reputation there and abroad. The time may come when King Charles in the UK is faced with other calls by countries to change their status, as we heard earlier from the panel. Rather than resist, we should welcome the birth of a modern Commonwealth and therefore the opportunity to enhance our soft power around the world. Thank you very much.